Hi, poets. We are going to talk about imagery and poetic leaps. When we think about imagery and poetry, we have so many different tools available to us to help create poetic leaps. So, showing our readers something on the page and having them connect that to meaning in different ways, meanings that the poet is putting on the page, but also meanings that they have developed off the page in their lives that they're bringing to the poem in that moment. We're going to talk through some of those different types of imagery that we can put in a poem. The first is visual imagery or relying on sight. And when you're describing what exists within the world of the poem, what the speaker of the poem or characters in the poem see, it's helping readers picture a scene. It helps readers get a sense of perhaps place, what the speaker is seeing, and you have the opportunity to suggest colors and shapes and where things are located within the world of the poem, what things look like. We also can make use of auditory imagery or sound, which can engage that sense of hearing and help readers imagine specific sounds in the poem, right? Maybe you have something projecting something really loud. Maybe there's traffic sound in the background, a bird song. And then when the reader is reading the poem out loud, your careful construction of the line and thinking about the sound of the words on the page also add in another level that might be pleasurable, might also provide a physiological response to the poem that readers can really appreciate and bring to that moment as well. We have tactile imagery or touch, right? Imagine how soft that collie is, right? As the person is grooming the collie. So thinking about what things feel like in the poem and evoking that sense of touch can help readers feel textures, temperatures, sensations that the speaker is feeling in the poem. And sometimes we don't always necessarily think about tactile imagery as readily as we do sight and sound when we're composing those first drafts. We also have olfactory imagery or smell. We all know smell can be a huge trigger for people, especially connecting a smell in the present to a memory or emotion from the past. So being mindful and maybe considering including descriptions of what things smell like or how the speaker or characters in a poem are responding to a smell. They walk into a coffee shop and what's happening, or they smell popcorn, right? Where is their brain going? That can help us understand emotional, nostalgic responses for whoever's in the page, but also as readers, we might consider and think about how those smells affect us and where they send us when we smell them ourselves. We also have gustatory imagery or taste, describing what things taste like can make an abstract experience more tangible. Think for a moment what flavor of ice cream that might be. When I have shared this photo and this idea in in-person workshops, I'll sometimes hear vanilla. I'll also hear key lime. Some people will share mint or lemon, right? And so all of those different flavors might affect what's going on in the mind of that person who's licking that ice cream in that moment. And for me as a reader, imagining the flavor of key lime, if I've had it before in my mouth or not, could bring something to that moment of the poem that is interesting. Kinesthetic imagery or movement, again, is a tool that we have and we will often include in poems, but we might do so just using our guts, kind of talking about how people are moving from one place to another, or maybe noticing the absence of movement. Right? Maybe a character in the poem is sitting very still and not responding to something that the speaker and readers think maybe they should be responding to. And so having movement in the poem and also not having movement in the poem can be telling and also help put us in the scene, as well as help us interpret through body language, through movement in time, movement through space, what's happening in the speaker's emotional response, those ideas. So using all of the tools at our disposal can help us add emotional depth through sensory detail and help our poems be something that's very vivid. It's not to say that you have to tell a very clear story that looks like a movie film in people's minds. Um, that's not the takeaway. You can. I personally like to write narrative poetry, but when you might be writing more abstractly or moving through a bunch of poetic leaps, which we'll talk about in a moment, giving people some concrete things to mull over, to experience, to connect to, can help them understand those emotions and ideas that the speaker is communicating to them through the poem. So here's an example. I'm going to focus on the imagery first. These are pictures of artichoke hearts. I talked to some people and they know all about artichoke hearts, and not just the kind that comes on your pizza at your favorite pizza store. They have had prepared for them complete artichoke hearts at home or at a restaurant, like you see there on your left. And then you also see the artichoke cut open and prepared, so you can see that heart that you would find on your pizza and also the leaves of the plant. I had my first artichoke when I started dating my now husband. His mother prepared them for me. Artichoke hearts were something that their family did, that was served at different holidays, and they were delightful. I loved them. I had never experienced that in my family at that point, and so if you've not tried artichoke hearts, I recommend it. It's very cool. It's a very kind of sweet flavor on your tongue. So Joseph Hutchinson, a poet in 1985, wrote a poem called Artichoke. So artichoke should bring some sort of image of the plant in your mind. And then his poem is just two lines. O heart weighed down by so many wings. And let that sit for a moment. O heart weighed down by so many wings. And think for a moment what imagery, what ideas, what emotions that observation brings up to you. Perhaps you might not see artichokes in the same way moving forward. So let's talk about leaps, what Joseph Hutchinson just did, right? He leapt from the physical understanding of what an artichoke literally is that you hold in your hand or you put in your mouth or you eat on your pizza, many other ways to eat them as well, to the idea of a heart, right? You can kind of see the purple of the inner leaves there in this particular artichoke, weighed down, right? It's inside at the heart of the flower bud by so many wings. And if you take a look, you can see in the artichoke that's cut in half, kind of all of those layers. And then if you look at the artichoke on the left, you can see what it looks like from the outside. And it does, in my opinion, I agree with Mr. Hutchinson. It does give a sense of that, the wings, the feathers on the wings of a bird. So he's pulling through all of those different images to help describe it, and then also giving us kind of that emotional punch, right? A heart weighed down by so many wings. Also, for those of you asking about how long does a poem have to be, when I say long enough to do its job, right, there's an example of a very short poem that gives us lots to think about and a pleasurable experience in a very, very small space. So we're going to talk a moment about poetic leaps. This is also in the readings from the course by Dorian Laux. But Robert Bly was one of the first poets to really start putting this idea down on the page. He wrote a number of essays back in the day, 70s and such, when MRI research was just getting started and doctors and scientists were starting to put people inside the MRI tube, give them different stimuli, and seeing what parts of the brain lit up. And we have three main parts of the brain that at the time it was called kind of the lizard brain, the part of the brain that is just entirely fight or flight, right? Trying to protect you. And then the idea of the mammal brain, which came around. Again, this is language they used at that time. And that was the part of the brain that suddenly started to consider other individuals that were close to you. So you may be protecting your sibling from danger, even though it might put you in danger. And then the neocortex, and that's that outer layer of the brain that's all squiggly that we see in our Halloween decorations. And that part of the brain, they noticed, would light up when the brain was presented with different ideas that dealt with art and spirituality and creativity. So Robert Bly was very interested in this research, how the brain was responding, and started to think through how might that be working with poetry. He felt that poetic leaps move readers from one image or idea to another in unexpected ways, that leaps create tension by kind of juxtaposing or contrasting images or ideas. And if we think back to Hutchinson's work, we have the literal bud of the flower, we have the idea of the heart, we have the ideas of wings that might take you to the idea of birds or angels. So we have all of these different images coming and lighting up different parts of our brains. That poetic leaps push us beyond literal meaning, right? And invite our readers to make different connections. So if you've never had an artichoke before, you might be experiencing Hutchinson's poem a little bit differently than somebody who has had an artichoke before, or given your connection to the idea of a heart being weighed down by wings, what that means to you might be different than somebody else. So there's a lot of flexibility there with interpretation. But what's important is that the leap kind of surprises us and deepens that meaning of the poem. That as we read it and we're thinking, oh, that connects to this and that connects to that, whether it's on the page or your personal experience, that makes for a very rich, pleasurable, meaningful poem between the poet and the reader. So I wanted to focus in on some strategies beyond just tapping into all of the senses while you are writing and revising, and also annotating and reflecting on other people's poems. But we have figurative language techniques of simile, metaphor, allusion, and anecdote that you're already familiar with, but you can use very intentionally in order to create these leaps. So I wanted to give you a few examples and then give you a little bit of time to practice and try it out before you head into the next poem you write for yourself. So that simile is a comparison using the words like or as. It lets you as a poet be very specific about what attribute of the object you're comparing something to applies to your subject. So this is a photograph I took on the freeway. My husband was driving us to work, and I saw all of this sod, and I thought that is very unusual and very interesting. So I took a picture of it outside the window. So if I were going to perhaps describe this as for readers using a simile, what I wrote was sod was rolled up and stacked like ho-hos on a platter. I don't know if you have experienced ho-hos, but those are cake rolled up with white filling. And then they have a chocolate coating. So seeing the grass all intertwined with the dirt there and having that hard outer dirt shell totally took me to that childhood snack that was very popular in the 80s. We have our metaphor, which is very much like the simile, only the comparison includes the entire object that you're comparing to your subject. So here I could say the sod was moving slowly, a caravan of snails. Saying a caravan of snails, right? I'm trying to get you to picture again the swirls on their shells, a whole bunch of them packed together, and it moving slowly together as a group forward on its own. And I'm letting you decide of that comparison, what are all of the things that you would want to bring to the understanding rather than just one specific detail, like maybe just the shell. We have an illusion, and an illusion is a indirect comparison to something outside of the text. Right? We're not mentioning it explicitly. It's not a part of the poem. And you've seen this happen in poems where you see a reference that you connect to a book or a character or a movie or a song or a moment in history that you're familiar with, or maybe a news article, a scientific concept or term. So the illusion reminds you, like, hey, this is applicable. And then you have all of that information and access and can even do research and then think about how that applies to the moment in the poem. I chose to leap to Harry Potter, which has been around for a long time and something that I enjoyed reading with my daughter. Wizardry must have rolled and stacked the sod, a job of which Hermione would have approved. So, in just mentioning Hermione and wizardry, I take you, hopefully, if you're familiar, to the movie or the book series and all of the magic that goes into moving things around, and perhaps Hermione's special sack of requirement that had everything stored in it for her crew. And then the anecdote. And an anecdote is a story you tell, right? You're chatting with somebody, you're like, oh, that's like this. And you tell a little story. And so you can tell little stories within a poem. So you're in the present moment saying, this is what we're talking about. Ooh, you need to know about this that happened in the past. Ooh, you need to know about this over there. So you can make leaps to little stories within the poem. Here, I wrote, passing the grass stacked on the semi, I was reminded of church camp. All the sleeping bags rolled and stacked in the pickup, ready for a night under the stars. Right. So in that description, I'm connecting to a childhood memory, right? All of this the sleeping bags in their rolls, different colors, all stacked up, but pretty consistent sizes, like the sacks here. But it's bringing in a very different vibe than Hermione, right? Or snails, or the ho-ho snacks. Although you could argue all of those kind of tie back to childhood and nostalgia for me, the poet in that moment. But we're going to take a moment to practice, so make sure that you have a piece of paper and a writing utensil or a stylus with you. Ready? What I'd like you to do is describe this image. Or if you're not feeling Peanut, that's the cat who lives with my family. He's our roommate. You could also grab a photo off your phone if you want. But I'd like you to describe the scene or the image, or maybe just the coffee or the quilt, so you can pick out what you want to describe using a simile, a metaphor, an allusion, and an anecdote. So you're going to do for this picture what I just did for the sod photo. Now that you've warmed up and practiced, what I'd like you to do is give it a try. Definitely find a photo that you've taken, I recommend, or you could go to social media or the internet generally. You can even use this photo I took of construction. I was standing in the Starbucks parking lot downtown. That is the health building being built there, and I just thought the crane was so stunning on that sunny day. Um, but create a quick draft of a poem that uses multiple senses, that kind of evokes a strong emotion, and show us that emotion without saying what it is directly. So you can use any of the strategies we've talked about in this video. And if I were to look at that and come at it from the point of view of, wow, I am really proud that so many people can work together to create something like that, I would write a poem that reflect that sentiment while I was looking at it in progress, and I would not say the word pride. You get the game? All right. And if you don't, here's one more. Let's say I'm looking at that and I know the building that they tore down to create that, and that makes me sad losing that part of the city's history. How do I describe that scene and let people know that sadness about history being lost and replaced by something more modern without saying, I'm sad, things are changing? Now you got it? Okay. So take your moment to uh, write your draft. I recommend maybe setting a timer for 5 minutes, like we do in class exercises, to give yourself time to create a draft, but we're not like hitting the computer and typing up a final draft at this point. So I leave you with this challenge. As you are composing, revising, and sharing feedback on other poets' drafts and poems that are getting nearly polished, take time to notice how leaps are being used in the poem to provide points of connections for readers. And also consider if a poet is kind of keeping us in one moment and you're not seeing any points to help you connect to that moment in different ways, are there missed opportunities? Could a leap be revised into the poem so that you have a better sense of what it feels like in that moment? I can't wait to see what you create.